The sound came first, the clink of chains, the crack of a whip. Then silence. In the heart of Texas, under a sun so fierce it split the ground open, a girl stood barefoot on a wooden platform. Her wrists were bound in rusted iron. Her dress hung in rags, soaked with sweat and dust. She didn't cry. She hadn't for years. Crying never changed anything here. Around her, men with hats pulled low, whispered like traders sizing up cattle. The air stank of tobacco and dry hay. A fly buzzed near her face, landed on the cut along her cheek, and she didn't even flinch. "Next one," the auctioneer barked, his voice thick with drink. 17, no husband, no family, quiet type, $5 to start. The crowd shifted. No one spoke. Someone spat into the dirt. The girl's name was Lena Crowe. Once, her father had owned 2 horses and a patch of land near the Brazos River. Once, she'd laughed under that same sun. But the war had burned everything. Her home, her people, even the sound of her own voice. The auctioneer tugged the chain around her wrists, yanking her forward. The metal cut into her skin. The crowd leaned in closer. "Won't talk? Won't work?" he sneered. "Too stubborn for her own good." A child somewhere in the barn began to cry. A mother hushed him quickly. Nobody wanted to remember what this place really was. Lena stared at the ground, her lips cracked, her pulse steady in defiance. Somewhere outside, a door creaked, slow, deliberate. Boots scraped against the dirt floor. A voice spoke, low and even, cutting through the silence. "I'll pay 20. The crowd turned. No one had offered that much for years. And as every head twisted toward the sound, the auctioneer blinked, his grin faltering. The man in the faded brown coat stood in the doorway, hat shadowing his face. For the first time in a long while, Lena lifted her eyes. Would anyone come to save her before the night fell? Before we find out what happens next, tell me, what time is it where you're listening from? And if you want to ride along for more tales of courage, subscribe now. Now, let's see what waited for them in the dark. The auctioneer's gavel hit the post. Sold! A murmur swept through the barn. $20 for a girl who hadn't spoken in years. Some men laughed. Others shook their heads. "Fool's charity," someone muttered. The man in the brown coat stepped forward, slow and steady. His boots left prints in the dust, wide, heavy, deliberate. He was tall, maybe 56, with gray in his beard and hands too scarred for comfort. His name was Elias Ward, a rancher from the far side of the Brazos, the kind of man who didn't talk much because life had already taken most words from him. He reached into his pocket, unfolded a crumpled stack of bills, and placed them in the auctioneer's palm. The man licked his thumb, counted twice, then grinned. "She's all yours, mister." Lena didn't move. Her eyes were glass, green, but hollow, like something long buried. Elias pulled off his hat. When the light hit her face, he saw the mark on her wrist, a small crescent scar, pale against the dirt. He remembered wrapping that wound himself 8 years ago, when she was just a child hiding behind her father's leg, crying because a wild colt had kicked her. He'd told her it wouldn't leave a mark. He'd lied. Elias's hand trembled slightly as he unhooked the chain from the post. The girl staggered, too weak to stand. He caught her before she fell. Her skin was burning hot. "Easy," he whispered. "You're free now." But she didn't answer, didn't even look at him. The silence between them was heavier than any chain. Outside, the sunlight struck like a blade. The crowd spilled out behind them, muttering, some in mockery, some in disbelief. "Ward's gone soft," one voice sneered. "Ain't no savin' ghosts, old man." Elias didn't turn. He walked her past the corral, past the wagons waiting in the heat. The horses neighed restlessly. Even they seemed to sense something had changed. When they reached the dirt road, he paused, glancing back once. The barn door swung shut with a hollow thud, like the world closing on a sin he couldn't undo. He helped her onto a small mare, careful not to touch the bruises along her arms. Then he climbed onto his own horse, the saddle creaking under his weight. They rode in silence through the dying afternoon, the sky glowing the color of old blood. Dust rose behind them, soft as smoke. He didn't know if she remembered him, or if she'd rather forget. But as the road stretched out before them, one truth burned clear in his mind. He had no idea that saving her would cost him everything. The road stretched endless before them, a thin, cracked vein cutting through fields of dry grass and heat. Elias rode ahead, his shadow long and bent. Behind him, Lena walked barefoot, the chain still wrapped loosely around her wrist, clinking with every step like the echo of her own captivity. When they reached the shade of an old oak tree, Elias dismounted. He tied both horses to a branch and reached into his saddlebag for a small canteen. He approached slowly, careful not to frighten her. "Here," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "It ain't much, but it's clean." Lena hesitated. Her eyes flicked up, then back down, watching his hands as though they might strike her. After a long silence, she reached for the canteen. Her fingers trembled as the cool metal touched her skin. She drank, slow and guarded, then wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. Her voice came out cracked, edged with bitterness. "Guess you got what you paid for." Elias froze, the words cut deeper than any knife. "I didn't buy you," he said finally. "I bought your freedom." She laughed, not the sound of joy, but of someone too tired to believe in mercy. "Freedom?" she said. "That word don't mean much when men like you get to decide who has it." The wind stirred the grass around them, a dry hiss. Elias didn't argue. He just crouched down, rubbing the dirt between his fingers like a man searching for the right words in the dust. "I know what this place did to you," he said softly, "and I know I can't fix it. But you deserve a life that's yours again." She turned her face away, her jaw tightening. "You talk like you know me." Elias looked at her wrist again, the small crescent scar, pale against the grime. "I did," he murmured, "a long time ago." The sun pressed down hard, baking the world in gold and silence. Far in the distance, a vulture circled above the plain. Lena rose, her knees shaken. "Where are we going?" she asked. "My ranch," Elias said. "It's quiet there. You'll be safe." "Safe," she repeated, tasting the word as if it were poison. "There's no such thing in Texas." Elias didn't argue. He handed her a crust of bread, climbed onto his horse, and offered a hand to help her up onto the smaller mare. She didn't take it. Instead, she climbed on herself, wincing as the saddle scraped her bruises. They rode side by side now, though the space between them felt like a canyon. Every few minutes, she glanced over her shoulder, half expecting riders to appear from the hills. And Elias, he kept his eyes forward, haunted by the same ghosts. As dusk began to fall, he finally spoke again. "When we get there, I'll unlock the rest of that chain. You have my word." Lena said nothing. The chain rattled once, faint as a whisper. They passed the burned remains of a farmhouse, charred beams jutting up like broken bones. Lena slowed her horse, staring at the ruin. Something in her eyes flickered, pain, memory, or both. Elias turned to look, then looked away quickly. He didn't need to ask. He already knew whose land it used to be. Night came sudden and sharp. The air cooled, but the silence grew heavier. Somewhere behind them, a coyote howled, long, mournful, like a warning carried on the wind. Elias tightened his grip on the reins. He thought he'd saved her, but this was only the beginning of a darker fight. By the time they reached the ridge above the Brazos, the sun had turned red, heavy as blood on the horizon. Elias pulled the horses to a stop. From here, the land spread wide and quiet, painted in the color of rust and smoke. It should have felt like freedom, but it didn't. The wind changed. A faint rumble echoed down the valley. Hooves. He felt it before he saw them. 3 riders, silhouettes against the dying light, coming fast. "Get behind me," Elias said. Lena froze. "Who are they?" "Men you don't ever want to meet." Dust rose in coils as the riders drew near. The one in front wore a black coat, polished badge on his chest glinting like a lie. Sheriff Dalton. The name alone could set a room cold. He had once called himself the Law, but everyone in 3 counties knew he sold justice to the highest bidder. 8 years ago, he led the raid that burned the Crowe farm to ash. Now his smirk returned like a wound reopening. "Well, if it ain't Elias Ward," Dalton drawled, sliding off his horse. "Didn't think I'd see you keeping company with the dead." His eyes shifted to Lena. She stood still, her hands trembling at her sides. The scar on her wrist caught the light. Dalton's smirk faltered. Only for a second. Elias stepped forward, voice steady. "You've had your look, Dalton. Now ride on." The sheriff's hand hovered near his holster, not quite touching. "You buyin' lost girls now, Elias? That what you do, out here in the dust, savin' souls that don't want saving?" Elias's tone didn't rise. "I paid for her freedom, not her body." The other men chuckled. The sound was dry and mean. Dalton took a slow step closer. "Freedom," he repeated, tasting the word like whiskey. "You know, I remember that name, Crowe. Her daddy was a traitor. You remember that, don't you?" Lena's breath caught. Her nails dug into her palms. She wanted to scream, to spit the truth at him, but her voice had been stolen the night her world burned. Elias's jaw tightened. "You remember wrong," he said. Dalton smiled. "Do I?" He reached into his pocket, pulled out a single bullet, and placed it gently on the fence post between them. The metal gleamed dull in the fading light. "A reminder, Ward," he said softly. "Some ghosts don't stay buried." For a long moment, no one breathed. Then Dalton tipped his hat, turned his horse, and rode off, his men trailing like shadows. When they were gone, the silence felt heavier than before. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Lena stepped forward, eyes fixed on the bullet. She picked it up carefully, turning it in her palm. "Who was that?" she asked quietly. Elias looked toward the horizon where the riders had vanished. "Not yet," he said, "not tonight." Thunder rolled somewhere far off. The first drops of rain fell, slow, steady, hissing against the dust. They mounted again, heading for the ranch through sheets of silver water. Neither spoke. The storm grew louder, washing the blood-colored sky clean. By the time they reached the porch, both were soaked through. Elias led the horses to the stable, his movements slow, deliberate, the way a man works when his mind is crowded. Inside the cabin, Lena stood by the window, watching lightning crawl across the sky. In her hand, she still held the bullet. She whispered to herself, so soft even the storm couldn't hear. "Some ghosts don't stay buried." And for the first time in years, she felt something stir behind her silence. Not fear, not yet hope, but the faintest ember of defiance. Outside, the thunder cracked again, closer this time. Elias stood in the doorway, rain dripping from his hat brim, eyes on the horizon. He knew what storms like this meant in Texas. They never came alone. He took a deep breath and said quietly, "Before we find out what happens next, make sure you hit that subscribe button and stay close. Things are about to get darker." The wind howled through the valley, carrying with it the smell of rain and gunpowder, a promise of the reckoning yet to come. That night, the rain didn't stop. It fell like time itself had slowed, every drop heavy with memory. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low, shadows flickering along the log walls. Elias sat by the table, sharpening the edge of an old knife, though he had no reason to. Some habits stayed when sleep refused to come. Lena sat across from him, her wet hair tangled around her shoulders. She hadn't said a word since Dalton left that bullet behind. But now she reached slowly into her pocket and placed something on the table between them. A silver pocket watch. Old, worn, initials barely visible. R.C. Elias's hands stilled. "I found it," Lena said, her voice quiet but steady. "In the ashes, 8 years ago." She turned it over in her palm, thumb brushing the carved initials. Robert Crowe.
My father. The sound of rain filled the silence between them. "I kept it all this time," she continued. "Every time they sold me somewhere new, I hid it. It was the only thing left that was truly mine." She looked up at him now, her eyes sharp but trembling at the edges. "You knew him, didn't you?" Elias's throat tightened. He nodded once. "I did." "Then tell me the truth," she said. "What really happened that night?" The words hung there, soft but cutting. Elias leaned back, the chair creaking beneath him. For a long time, he didn't speak. Then he set the knife down, stared into the fire as though it could swallow his guilt. "My father wasn't the man I thought he was," he began slowly. "After the war, he saw opportunity in the ruins. He sold out your family to Dalton and his men. Told them you were harboring rebels, said it'd make him a hero." He exhaled, long and uneven. "I heard him that night. I rode to warn your father, but when I got there, it was already burning. I saw the fire, the soldiers, the smoke." His voice cracked. "I didn't go in. I ran." The silence that followed was unbearable. The only sound was the rain against the roof and the faint ticking of the old watch. Lena's hands clenched around it until her knuckles went white. "You think telling me this makes it better?" "No," Elias said softly, "it doesn't. But you deserve to know who you're standing next to." Her jaw trembled. For a moment, she looked like she might throw the watch into the fire, to burn the memory clean, but she didn't. She held it tighter. "My father died calling for help," she whispered. "No one came." Elias lowered his eyes. "I know." The fire hissed, spitting sparks. "Sometimes," he said, voice barely audible, "mercy is the hardest bullet to fire." Lena's eyes filled with tears, not of grief, but of rage too long held. "If your father did all that," she said, "why are you the one carrying the guilt?" Elias looked up at her, his expression stripped bare. "Because I was there," he said, "because I did nothing, and because I'm still breathing when they're not." Lightning flashed through the window, cutting their faces in pale light. Outside, thunder rolled like the earth remembering what it tried to forget. For a long moment, neither spoke. The rain eased to a steady whisper, the kind that makes truth sound louder. Then a sound broke through the quiet. Hooves, fast, close. Elias stood, grabbing his rifle from beside the door. "Stay here," he said. Lena rose too. "It's him, isn't it?" Elias didn't answer. The look in his eyes said enough. The storm outside hadn't left after all. It had just been waiting. He opened the door. Wind roared in, scattering ashes across the floor. Far out on the dark road, lightning flashed again, and in that brief white light, 3 silhouettes appeared. Dalton had come back. Morning came soft and golden. The storm had washed the world clean. Even the air smelled different, like wet earth and beginnings. Elias stepped outside first, boots sinking into the damp soil. The fields shimmered under a thin mist, and in the distance the sun lifted itself over the hills like a slow promise. He took a long breath. For the first time in years, it didn't hurt to breathe. Behind him, the door creaked.
Lena stepped out quietly, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. Her hair was still damp, and a strand clung to her cheek. She looked tired, but not hollow anymore. They didn't speak.
They didn't need to. The silence between them had changed. It was no longer the kind that carried pain, but the kind that lets pain go. Elias walked to the fence where last night's gunfire had torn the planks loose. He picked up a hammer and a handful of nails. His shoulder ached, but he didn't complain. "Hand me that board," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he meant it to. Lena handed it to him. Their hands brushed, just for a moment, and she didn't flinch this time. "You're doing it wrong," she murmured, almost teasing. Elias looked up. The faintest smile tugged at his mouth. "Then show me how it's done." They worked side by side as the light grew warmer. The rhythmic sound of the hammer filled the air. One hit after another, like the steady heartbeat of the land rebuilding itself. By noon, the fence stood whole again. Elias straightened, wiping sweat and rainwater from his brow. Lena was already walking toward the small hill behind the ranch. He followed, a piece of wood tucked under his arm and the knife he'd used the night before resting in his hand.
At the top of the hill, the view stretched for miles, rivers silvered by sunlight, grass bending in the breeze. Lena knelt in the soft dirt, digging gently with her hands. Elias planted 2 wooden crosses in the ground. He carved the names slowly, carefully, each letter like a prayer. The first read, Robert Crowe. The second, simply, family. When he finished, Lena traced the names with her fingertips. Her eyes shimmered, but the tears didn't fall. Instead, she reached into her pocket one last time and pulled out the silver watch. The initials caught the light. "I think," she said softly, "it's time it stayed where it belongs." Elias shook his head. "It's yours. You kept it safe." She smiled, small, tired, but real. "Then let it stay here, with them." She placed the watch at the base of the cross. The wind lifted her hair, carried the faint ticking of the watch as if time itself had bowed its head. They stood together in silence. The sky stretched wide and merciful above them. A hawk circled high overhead, free, unburdened. Elias looked at her then, and something unspoken passed between them. Not love, not yet, but understanding. She smiled again. The voice in his memory whispered, for the first time in years. They walked back down the hill together, the sun warming their backs, the crosses standing behind them like 2 sentinels watching over peace hard-earned. By the time they reached the porch, Lena paused, glancing over her shoulder one last time. The hill glowed in the afternoon light, golden and still. "You think they'd forgive us?" she asked quietly. Elias didn't answer right away. He looked out toward the horizon, endless, open, kind. "Maybe forgiveness isn't something we earn," he said finally. "Maybe it's something we learn to live worthy of." The wind carried his words away, mingling with birdsong and sunlight. And in that quiet morning after the storm, peace, fragile but real, finally came home. The day faded the way all quiet days do, slowly, tenderly. By evening, the sky turned amber, and the wind softened over the valley. The crosses on the hill glowed in the last light, their shadows long and still. Inside the small cabin, a gentle peace had settled. The storm had taken its noise with it. Elias sat by the window, mending an old saddle strap. The leather was cracked, stubborn, like life itself refusing to fall apart. Across the room, Lena sat at the small wooden table, her hands folded around a cup of warm tea. Steam rose between them, curling like a prayer. For a long time, they didn't speak. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was honest, the kind that didn't need to fill itself with words. Finally, Lena looked up. "Do you think a soul can start over?" Elias thought about it, the war, the losses, the years spent wishing he could change the past. Then he nodded, his gaze steady on the horizon outside. "I think the Lord lets us start over every morning we wake," he said. "It's us who have to believe it." Lena smiled faintly, turning the cup in her hands. "Then maybe I'll start tomorrow." Outside, the wind brushed through the dry grass, whispering like an old hymn. Elias rose, poured another cup of tea, and set it beside her. They watched the night fall together, the stars blooming one by one, small lights over a land that had seen too much darkness. And in that quiet moment, there was nothing left to say, only the knowing that some wounds don't close all at once. They fade, gently, until what's left is the strength to keep living. Maybe salvation doesn't come from miracles, but from the quiet kindness we give to one another. If you were Elias Ward, would you have told her the truth or carried the guilt alone? If you were Lena, would you have forgiven him or walked away into the dark? Leave your thoughts on this Western tale in the comments. If this story touched your heart, please like the video and subscribe for more tales of courage and second chances. Pour yourself a cup of tea and tell me, what time is it where you're listening from tonight?